The ongoing drama of out-of-state guests visiting theme parks in California continues. Yesterday, following news that the CDC and the state of California had reduced their guidance on this topic, Universal Studios announced that they will begin allowing guests from out of state to visit their theme park. And in this episode of FreshBaked, we're going to be talking about the details of this announcement because it's not as simple as it sounds, as well as Disney's possible take on this news, on the CDC guidelines. All that coming up next on FreshBaked. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to FreshBaked. Man, I tell you what, this story has had, of all the things that have been happening with the reopening process and the guidelines and this and that, out-of-state guests, for me, has been perhaps the most volatile, talked about subject of any of it. Every day, the story develops a little bit further, and yesterday was no different. You'll recall last week that the CDC and the state of California had officially relaxed their guidelines, relaxed their restrictions on out-of-state guests, stating that those guests who were fully vaccinated no less than 2 weeks prior to the date of their visit or the date that they're going to a park, that they could do that thing. They could enjoy going to a theme park. SeaWorld wasted no time. It was like the next day, SeaWorld says, yep, come on in, guys. Welcome to SeaWorld. Just show us your vaccination card. And yesterday, Universal Studios Hollywood said pretty much the same thing. Although they had SeaWorld's announcement was a little bit light on detail. It was pretty much just a thumbs up. Universal Studios has a little bit more of a game plan to talk about. Actually, we've got details of that, and we're going to cover that next. First, obviously, you've got to have a vaccination card. You got to have a vaccination card that shows a date no less than 2 weeks prior to your visit to the theme park, and you've also got to have ID. Now, that ID is necessary, obviously, to make sure that you are the person who is holding that card, that you're the same person. Now, it also does say, which is an interesting thing, that you can bring a photocopy of your vaccination card. You don't have to have the actual paper vaccination card, though I would recommend having that if you can. But a photocopy will also work. And let that be a reminder to anybody out there who has a vaccination card. Do go ahead and take a photo of it on your phone and have that with you at all times, just in case. You never know. Second, and this is kind of an interesting component of this conversation, is that an out-of-state guest can't buy a ticket or make a reservation online. Like us here in California, we all had to do that. We have to buy our tickets online. We can't buy them at the gate. And we have to make a reservation if we want to go. Out-of-state guests can only walk up to a physical ticket booth at Universal Studios Hollywood and make their purchase on site and then go into the park that day. They even go so far as to say, to reduce the risk of disappointment, it is recommended that you consult the ticket calendar to see if the day that you want is sold out, which, I mean, I guess that's good. That's good advice. That's useful. Let's say before you get in your car and drive across the state to come visit Universal Studios in Hollywood, or get on a plane and, coming from Tennessee or something like that to come to Universal Studios Hollywood. It's useful to check the calendar before you do those things. But between then and your actual arrival at the park, a lot can happen. So it's not exactly, a guarantee if you check your date or you check the calendar before you make your trek across state lines. Interesting. But I think the reason that they're doing this is actually to discourage out-of-state guests from coming or trying to get a ticket to Universal Studios, which is interesting. Or more to the point, what they're trying to do is weed out the more casual person who has interest in going to Universal. That is to say, let's say they go online, they buy their ticket, and they make a reservation, and then for whatever reason they don't show up. And in the process of doing that, they have taken a reservation away from a California resident or somebody who has definitely who is more inclined to actually make the visit to Universal. What they're trying to do, in other words, is to target that certain percentage of guests who are really serious about going to Universal, so serious that they're willing to drive, into the state or to get on an airplane and come to Universal and risk there not being a ticket available to go. So I think that's why they're doing this. I mean, there still could be drama at the gate, as I mentioned. A lot can happen between getting on a plane and getting all the way to the gate at Universal. They could still show up and be sold out. That's still a risk, and that would be a conversation that they'll have to have at the gate. But I would imagine that that's preferable than out-of-state guests just chewing up all the reservations and nobody showing up to Universal. By the way, let me take this moment to remind Universal Studios annual pass holders that you don't make a reservation. Universal pass holders just show up at Universal and go to the park, assuming that they're not sold out. So it is incumbent upon you, pass holders, to check that same calendar before you get in your car and drive, an hour and a half or whatever it is for you, like it is for me, before you get there. Make sure the park is not, sold out that day. But just make sure that, as a pass holder, that you have checked before you go. And finally, they make a point of saying that the guidance, the updated guidance, doesn't make any reference to or an exception for kids under the age of 16. So they're saying that you have to be 16 or older in order to get in if you're from out of state. No children will be allowed in from out of state at all, whether or not you're vaccinated. Now, I'm not sure if there's a reason for this. I'm not sure if there's a reason why the CDC update didn't reference, that age group. I'm not sure if it's for a specific purpose or if it's an oversight, which is completely possible because, ever since this whole thing has started, the guidance has just been so vague and kind of full of loopholes and, just questions, so many questions. So I wouldn't be surprised if they amend this later to say, oh yeah, by the way, I guess we can let in 16-year-olds, which by the way, makes perfect sense. They've been saying all along that they're less likely to have the virus, children are, than adults. So it's backwards. I don't understand it. But anyway, what about Disney? What about Disney? What is their take on this? Well, we know, for example, when this news broke last week, when the CDC and state announced that they were relaxing the guidelines, somebody hit up Disney and said, what's up? And Disney said, until further notice, only California residents can go to Disneyland. And then that position has been reaffirmed once again as recently as Monday on the Disney Parks blog. Disney posted another kind of know before you go type article. And in that article, they said, California residents only, and bring proof of residency, because you may be asked to verify your residency. You may. By the way, note that they said bring proof of residency, not an ID. They didn't say bring an ID. They said bring proof of residency because you may be asked to verify that as necessary, which is another qualifier. Now, I'm not sure what that circumstance might be, an as necessary circumstance might be to require them to verify it, but it does suggest that not everybody's going to be checked, only, or asked to verify. Again, I don't know what that means. It just sounds like it's not a 100% all-in type situation where everybody has to do it. In either case, I would not recommend, by the way, for you to try to game this system in some way. I know it seems like there should be a way to do it. I just wouldn't suggest that. I wouldn't want anybody to risk coming in from another state and trying to see if they can't roll the dice and figure out a way in. I wouldn't recommend that because you just don't know. You just don't know. And it would suck if you got all this way and then you got boinged out, when you try to put your pass through or something like that. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So I don't recommend it. With that said, we've got one final interesting bit of news coming out of Walt Disney World, Florida. It is my expectation that Disneyland here in California will be using what's happening in Florida as a blueprint, a benchmark for how they're going to operate with respect to COVID guidelines and things like that. They are ahead of us, way ahead of us. But I think on an equal timeline, it should be assumed that we'll probably follow whatever it is that is happening at Walt Disney World. And one of the things that has happened, or that my understanding is going to happen, is that Disney World is going to reduce their social distancing requirements from 6 feet to 3 feet. Now, while this may seem inconsequential in so much as nobody really seems to observe that 6-foot rule when you're kind of walking around and milling about with other guests in the park, the only place you really see that being done is in a queue or in a restaurant, for example. And so the obvious inference there is that it means you could put more people, let's say in a restaurant, you could put more people in a queue. But beyond that, it does something even more important when it comes to capacity. Capacity limits are a product of how much physical space is available to the public. That is to say, actual square footage. How much square footage is available for a guest to participate in? This is why, if you recall, Disney was getting ready to extend the boundaries of Buena Vista Street when that was an extension of downtown Disney. They were getting ready to extend the boundaries into Grizzly Peak. Not because they thought people would have a great time walking around Redwood Creek Challenge or near to it, and then it would be lovely, which, by the way, it would have been. That's not the reason why they were doing it. They were doing it to add more square footage, more available square footage for bodies to rest. Now, it didn't matter if they were going to rest there or not. The fact is, the square footage was available. The more square footage you have available to guests, the more guests you can allow in. So by extension, reducing the amount of space required between guests affects the math that determines what the capacity limits are. Long story short, a 3-foot social distance limit allows Disney to expand their capacity by a lot, actually. And it only took 10 months to do that. They've been going at this since last July. So that's something that we have to look forward to or to observe to see if we see any changes on that here in Disneyland. Now, I will say, though, I don't expect it to take 10 months for something like that to happen here at Disneyland. We've been on a observable fast track in terms of reducing restrictions here in California. It has been happening quick, much quicker than it did initially at Florida. So I have a feeling it's just going to be a matter of a few months before we get to something that's actually approaching normal operations. So with that, stay tuned, of course, to Fresh Baked, because we are your authority, your leading authority on how to Disneyland. So we're going to be sure to keep our eyes and ears open, pay attention to this story and anything else that develops in the Disneyland news sphere. You can subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You can also follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked and on Twitter at FreshBakedDizzy. That's fresh with no E. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, everybody. Do stay safe out there. Be kind to one another. And Fresh Baked. I think that counts.